Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I'm your host, Randi-lee. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Doug Lawrence. You might remember from episode 55. Welcome back, Doug. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it's going to be another awesome episode. So for those of you who did not watch before, you're brand new to the channel, Doug was on episode 55. And we talked a lot about his career as a RCMP and what that kind of did to his mental state at the time. And today's episode, we're going to switch gears and talk about something else. But for those that have not watched it yet, first tell us a little bit about who you are.
My name is Doug Lawrence, and I am a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. So I retired after having served for 25 years. And as you've kind of mentioned, we talked about that in episode 55 in a little bit more detail. But as a result of my service, I came to realize that I had post-traumatic stress and that it had caused significant trauma for my family and obviously for myself and for people around me as well. So when I left the RCMP, I went into management consulting, and then from there into some leadership positions. And fast forward to, I think it was 2009 when I started my own company that is focused on mentoring and mentor training and mentor certification and all of that. In 2014, I published The Gift of Mentoring, a book that sort of gave you the grassroots look at what is mentoring and what's it all about and how can it be of value or benefit to me. And I'd been asked to write that book by a number of people. And fast forward to today, I was asked again to write another book, and the title of the new book coming out is You Are Not Alone. And it's very much focused on mentoring and mental health. And
that's needed. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so it's due to be released on the 17th of January.
Excellent. So everybody can grab their copies. All right. So let's go into today's topic. Actually, first, before we do that, I have to say, I really like those pictures behind you. So for those who are listening on the podcast, they can't see the pictures. They're like they're not quite flowers. They're like leafy plants. And they're just, I don't know. I like them.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. So now we'll get into the topic. So how about you lead this conversation because it's your story, and let us know where you want to begin.
So probably the best place to begin is, and I mean, when we talk about our mental health, we look at it from a number of different angles. There's, in fact, one of the things when I was introducing myself or going through what I'd done, where I'd been, and all of that sort of stuff, one thing that had popped into my mind was the aspect of workplace bullying and how that has actually can traumatize individuals to a pretty high level where, they end up, in fact, we've heard of lots of situations where as a result of workplace bullying, that people have committed suicide because it was too much for them to handle. And there was no support structure in place to even in the workplace and even in the schools for that matter, the support structure isn't where it needs to be. And I guess I have to give credit where credit is due, where they are making attempts, but we're not where we need to be. And we're facing a fairly, I call it the silent pandemic, which is the mental health aspect. So
yes, that is spot on. Like that is exactly what we are dealing with. Luckily, there are people like you and I and every other guest here that are trying to give voice to that silent pandemic, but it is because it is around the world. Anybody, anywhere can be dealing with
it. I read a statistic, and I mean, we talk about statistics and all that sort of thing, but I think it was that there are approximately 1 billion people globally today that are impacted by mental health challenges. 1 billion. So you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and go, am I one of those 1 billion? And, you very well could be.
Yeah.
But I know going back here to where the bullying in the workplace and that, I came to realize again, similar to what I did for You Are Not Alone, when I was researching that, was I came to realize that I'd been subjected to workplace bullying, and that it also had, it had a bit of an impact from a trusting perspective.
Okay.
So not only did it impact my mental health, but it also impacted the foundational piece of relationships, which is trust. And
that's so true.
In a couple situations, a couple different organizations that I worked in, bullying was there. Like the RCMP, for example, I was subjected to bullying by by the person I reported to, and we didn't know how to deal with it back then.
Mm-hmm.
Or so we said.
Yeah, well, there you go. So can you give an example of, and you can choose a real life one, or if you're not comfortable with that, just an example of what a workplace bullying situation might actually look like, so that people who are listening will be able to identify if that's ever happened to them.
I can give you an example of one of the places I was working in where it was actually bullying through fear and intimidation. And I had acted on something that I thought was good. I had done my homework, and based on the information I had, this was the direction we needed to go. And I took my team in that direction, only to have my boss turn around and tell me, no, that's not the direction you're going to go. I'll tell you the direction you're going to go. And he actually sent out an email lambasting me in this email for, inappropriate decisions, didn't have the authority to make that decision, and so on. And it just kept, and he carbon copied. I joked afterwards, because that was all I could do. He carbon copied everyone except the Queen of England in the email. And it made me, like, people looked to me and said, so why would we come to you now to get answers to our questions, when what you tell us, we don't trust that, you even know what you're talking about anymore.
So he completely undermined your authority.
Okay. And then what comes out of that is, and we see this quite often, is then I became that robotic employee that I'll sit and do only what I have to until you tell me to do otherwise. Or sometimes I'll choose not to do anything until you tell me what you want me to do. And then you lose all the creativity, the critical thinking, you lose all of those pieces. And it's like shoving a knife into someone's mental health.
Yeah, because now it's basically saying that you're stupid is the first thing that comes to mind, right? You can't do your job. You're a useless employee, right? Like that's tough. Yeah.
And, and we see that, gosh, you see that in a lot of different places. Because even when I was, working in one of the other organization, it was the same sort of thing, was, and it's little things, but people don't understand how that can kind of just chip away at your mental psyche.
Yeah.
And I worked with a boss who used to say, okay, I want you guys to go away and put a list together of things that we're going to tackle next. And we said, cool. So we go away and we spend time researching, putting all this list together. We come in and we sit in his office, and he said, so does everybody have their lists and everything else? And we all hold them out, real happy and excited and proud of what we've done. And he said, that's good. I'm glad you did the work. Lifts his blotter up, pulls out his list and said, this is what we're going to do.
Well, that was a waste of time and effort.
Yeah. So once again, chipped away just a little bit more at that mental health, wall that we sometimes have. chipped away at it to the point where, well, I'm just going to wait till you tell us what you want us to do next time.
Yeah, well, because what's the point of wasting all that time when it's not even going to be looked at?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and it's not quite the same thing, but yesterday I was trying to catch my kid up with their schoolwork, and in science class, the teacher always gives a bajillion practice questions. And I'm like, he doesn't even look at these. What's the point? Like, and I do understand the point. Like, it's not entirely the same thing, but that's what popped into my head, is doing all of this work for no real purpose. And I guess, right, in school, there's a purpose, you're learning, whatever. But to have the amount of them that there is just like, I don't know what else we're going to do in class today, so here's just a whole bunch of them, even though you kind of got it after the first 10. Here's 50 more. Yeah, that's just what popped into my head because we were just working on it last night. But yeah, no, when you're given stuff to do at work, you expect it to be appreciated, looked at. That's how you value your employees. That's how you keep good employees, is showing them value.
And I think, and when we talk about the silent pandemic, I think that we as people, as human beings on the face of the earth, we've lost sight of the impact that our actions can have on others' lives.
Yeah, we're very eye-based.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. And I even, sadly enough, I still see that even today where, you sit down to have a conversation and you go, oh, here we go again, another me person or an I person.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I used to shut down in conversations where that was taking place. Was, somebody say, well, you didn't say very much. How come you didn't ask any questions? What's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point?
You're just going to bring it all back to yourself anyways. So who cares? Yeah. I'm actually listening to an audiobook right now called Outlaw by Ted Decker. And just as I was getting ready, the part that was being read to me was, okay, so the basis is this lady, she's now in an island with people that she doesn't know. She doesn't speak their language. She was the capsized boat, and now she's stuck with them and whatever. And so throughout the last few chapters, she's talking about her situation and how she views their nakedness as this bad thing, and how she views what they're eating as a bad thing. That's not, and she actually says in this part that I was just listening to, I didn't like their nakedness. I didn't like the food they were giving. I didn't want to bathe in the muddy water. I didn't want to sleep on the floor. I. And then she goes, but now as I get to know the people around me, because she's no longer captive, they've kind of freed her, but she still has to live with them. She's saying, now that I'm getting to know them and the kids and their ways, I can understand from their perspective why they were scared of me, why they do what they do, and how their living is okay. Right. And it was this big shift. And it's so funny that we're talking about this culture that we have now of society of I, when I literally 15 minutes ago just heard that part of my book. And it's a shift. It's all about shifting that perspective to consider other people's feelings and what they might be considering and thinking.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into sort of the next part of the conversation. And that's to talk a little bit about grief.
Yeah.
And how that can play on your mental health and mental well-being and all of those things. And so just a bit of a backdrop for our listeners is that back in February 6th, to be exact, I lost my wife, Deborah, to a battle with cancer. And I can't remember if we touched on that.
It was mentioned, but we didn't talk much about it. It was mentioned that you had lost her.
Yeah. So so it'll actually be coming up next week. It'll be 10 months since she's passed. And I'm also, as part of my grieving process, I've joined a bereavement counseling program that has probably I think they said there was over 30 of us that were enrolled in this. And so thank God for the benefit of technology. They break us out into breakout rooms and smaller groups where people are more comfortable.
Yeah,
And
30 is a lot.
yeah, I know myself in a group of 30, I know that's not true. In a group of 30, I would still talk, but
a lot of people wouldn't.
Yeah, that's true. So they broke us into, I think, 3 or 4 different rooms, and we meet. The program's over now, but I'm still seeing the after effects of what's taken place. So I think that for me, what came out of this was, in some respects, it's brought me even closer, if that was even possible, even closer to my wife, Deborah, as a result of the grieving process. And it's helped me from a mental health perspective. I still hate weekends, but from a mental health perspective, what it's done for me is it's made me more aware of how different things will trigger different feelings, which will have an impact on my mental health. And I went to watch my granddaughter play ringette. She's just starting out playing ringette.
Nice.
And to go to the rink, to the hockey facility or the skating rink where she was going to play, I had to drive by the hospital that I spent from from December until February, almost living in the hospital. And I would drive by it every time to go and park and all that sort of stuff. And massive trigger, massive trigger.
Yeah.
Because right away started to get very emotional, and there you are driving the vehicle down a busy city street and you're getting emotional and you're going like, why is this happening? And I've come to realize that there are triggers that will cause you to become emotional. There's, right? There's all of that sort of stuff. And it can play and will play on your mental health, your mental well-being, because it can.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, thinking about it's your wife, and thinking about if my husband was to go, I mean, I wouldn't know what to do. And I know you and your wife were together for a very long time. I remember that as part of our previous conversation. And so I just think for myself, I would be in a complete fog and wouldn't know what to do. So that must have been a horrendous time. So I was curious, though, you mentioned that throughout this bereavement counseling, you felt closer to your wife. How did that work?
Because the facilitator would ask questions and would ask, does anybody have something they care to share? Like as an example, what do you have today that helps you in coping with the loss of your loved one?
Okay.
So for me, I've created what I call my tribute table. So, and on the tribute table, I have Deborah's glasses. I have, a couple tubes of lipstick that were her favorite color. I have her urn. I have a picture of her. I have 2 little tea lights that are, so I'm told, is that if you light both, it opens up the communication channel for the 2 of you to have a conversation. So I have all of those on that table. And then the next shelf below, I have a picture of my mom, her mom, and my grandfather, and then another urn of Deborah's mom's ashes and stuff. So it's a memory, what I call a memory table. And
yeah,
every morning, in fact, just before we started to have our conversation, I sat down in front of the memory table and I had a bowl of cereal and a conversation.
Oh, that's very sweet, actually. Yeah.
But that's my coping mechanism. That starts my day off on a very positive note. And that's how I make sure that my mental well-being is in a good place to start my day.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I never would have thought to do that on my own. Like I would have had to hear that from somebody else to do something like that.
Yeah, and in the group there was 7 or 8 of us in the small bereavement group that I was in. I was the only one that had actually done that.
Okay.
Everybody else had something more tangible, I guess. Like, some people had a piece of clothing or,
Okay.
and actually I have friends of ours, she took pieces of Deborah's clothing and cut it up into swatches and sewed it together in a pillow. And it was, here are some clothes that I used to wear, hold me tight, hold me dear.
Yeah.
So, right. So it was stuff like that. But we don't, and I think the point that I want to make here is that it's all these different things that can impact our mental health and our mental well-being.
Yeah.
So the loss of a loved one, somebody's in the hospital because of an illness or something like that. All of that plays on our mental health and our mental well-being. And, those statistics I gave when we first started on this part of it, they're alarming. Like they're scary.
Yeah, they really are. And so I lost my brother earlier this year.
Sorry.
Thank you. It's definitely not the same kind of impact, I would say, but I totally understand that mental health part of how grief works. So he was part of that 1 billion statistic because he died from addiction. And the mental health side of it for me was very much real and screaming in my head about what could I have done differently? Or what could I have, said or did or whatever to change the outcome? And ultimately nothing. Nothing could have been said or done because they weren't my choices, they were his choices. But it's that mental health impact that you have to get over. And I'm going to say it like that because that's my way of dealing with it. Some people may say, oh, you don't get over it, but that's your opinion. My opinion is different. And it's those first few weeks where that kind of thought process of what could I have done and replaying the last couple conversations I had with him, because it's not like I talked to him often, but I did have a conversation with him like 2-3 weeks before he passed. And so I'm replaying that conversation over and over. What could I have said? And it took a few weeks. And it was actually, I read a really good book by one of the guests on the show. I'll have to look it up again. Yeah, I'll have to look it up again because it's not coming to the top of my mind. And that book is actually what helped me to overcome that part of the grieving process for myself, because in there it said, it is okay to be mad. Right. And I was mad at him. Like your wife, totally different circumstances, but depending on who you're grieving or what you're grieving, you're allowed to have the emotions that you are feeling. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that I was trying very hard not to be mad at him. Because, everybody's coming around, all the family members come around saying, oh, I remember when he was this and that. And I mean, my brother was a nice person, but he was still a drug addict. And when people were talking about him and completely ignoring the past almost 20 years of his life, it's like, almost felt like he had died 20 years ago, the way that they were talking, because they were ignoring a big chunk of his life. And that was very difficult to kind of deal with and process too. So finally, when we buried him, because we buried him almost a month after the funeral, because we were waiting for COVID to let us have people. And I yelled at him at the gravesite. I did. I yelled at him. And then everybody's looking at me like, oh, you're yelling at him? And my godmother actually said, you're gonna yell at the boy now. I go, yeah. And you know what? I know all of you are mad at him too. Because are we supposed to be here right now burying him? And I go, it doesn't mean I'm not sad, but it also doesn't mean that I can't be angry. And I think that's just a really good part of my grieving process. And I think people need to understand that you're going to have tons of emotions. I had sadness, right? Anger and regret and all sorts of things. And we have to let ourselves feel them and not stuff them down, because that's just going to make it a lot worse. So that's my experience with it.
And you're bang on from what I've experienced. And I went through it too the first couple months, where I kept asking, what could have I done differently? And, and you're absolutely right. There was nothing I could have done to change the outcome, but were there things I could have done? Could have I spent more time at the hospital? Could have I, sat on the end of her bed more often than what I did? Could have I done this? Could have I done that? And, at the end, you sort of go, I don't know.
Yeah. And you're never going to know.
No.
And that's one of the hard hurdles to have to get over, because we're not going to know. I'm never going to know if I could have said anything different to change it. And ultimately, I don't think I could have. I mean, like I said, I've been doing it for 20 years. But I'll never actually have that answer. And I just have to be okay with not knowing.
Yeah, it's and we have to be able to, from a mental health perspective, make sure that we've managed what we can manage, and what we can't, we have to be able to accept and I know that seems to be an easy way out, but is to accept, what's taken place and how can I continue to move forward.
Yes. And I talk a lot on this show, and a lot of times I'll say, well, it's not easy, right? The words to say the steps of it are, right? Like you're saying, to accept it. And that's a really easy statement to say. And anything I think to deal with mental health or life in general is really, really easy to say, really easy to know what we need to do, really, really hard to actually do it.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. And when I think of, the group, the bereavement group that I was part of, and, everybody sort of says at the end of all of this, so how was that for you? And it helped make a difference. And I think the thing that I found, and it's probably the mentor in me that's coming out, was I saw a group of individuals who were going through the grieving process in their own special way come together and gel as a group.
Yeah.
And it was, you kind of wondered, okay, so when the last session was had, is that going to be the end? And I floated it out there that why don't we have even an hour-long call once every couple of weeks or whatever to just check in and see how everybody's doing. And it was just nice. Like, it was massive. Everybody running to the center, so to speak, to say, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of that. And it was people that, I was always the person that would volunteer to go first and share a story. Yeah. And it was to be able to see some of my colleagues in this group all of a sudden say they actually would beat me to the punch, so to speak, and they would be, they'd be willing to share some stories, about their loved one that they lost. Mm-hmm. So it was, I found that to be very helpful, but and it's just now that I've been thinking, is I've noticed the last couple days, setting aside the weekend. So even yesterday, I noticed that my ability to focus, which is part of my mental health, my mental well-being, my focus got kind of shifted or altered. And I'm trying to figure out what caused that. And I think part of it could be that, I didn't have a group session Monday night, and I was left with sort of that emptiness. And my weekend was kind of, I got to spend some time with some dear friends and watch the football game and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But there were time periods where just needing or wanting to have somebody to be able to lean on or to open up and say, this is how I'm feeling. I don't need advice or guidance. I just need someone to listen and hear.
That is another excellent point. So many times when we are sharing our feelings, people feel the need to give advice, and that is not the reason that we're sharing our feelings. That's one of the reasons I can't really talk to my mom too much about my brother. She's still processing the whole thing in her own way, which is fine. But when I try to say how I'm feeling about the whole thing and my thoughts or whatever on it, she feels the need to then tell me, give me advice, tell me, oh, whatever it happens to be. I don't want to get into the details. But she tries to give me advice. And so I'm just like, it's not what I need right now. I just need you to listen. So I'll usually talk to my aunt about it or my husband, because they are the best ones to just let me kind of rant away, let me get it all out and then move on. Because that's what I need in that moment. Because my aunt went to a grieving group thing after my grandma died a few years ago, and she said it was amazing. She said it worked really well, and trying to convince my mom to go, but so far no.
Yeah, it is, and the folks that they have that are the facilitators and all of that, they're angels. That's the only way I can describe them. For and I just keep thinking, I know what I go through when I'm mentoring and I'm listening and all that stuff, and my role is to guide and not to tell, but to guide. Mm-hmm. And I think I take on all their energy, their negative energy, and I'm just thinking, here's these dear sweet angels that are sitting there taking in everyone's energy, and they must go home at night, and I know it takes me probably 20 minutes to half an hour to decompress as somebody who is, I'm unloading all of my stuff, all my baggage, and they're picking, right? So
that's gotta be a tough job to do, for sure. Okay, so what would be your advice to somebody who is going through a grieving process themselves?
Well, twofold. Number one, I'm a firm believer now in you need to reach out and ask for help. And your help can come from, it can be a mentor, but it can also be, that counselor, that bereavement counselor person that's trained in all kinds of different therapies and modalities of therapies and stuff. Those folks are there for a reason. And so I would be reaching out. I'm kicking myself that I didn't reach out sooner.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think that's my best advice is kind of comes back to the title of my book, which is You Are Not Alone. And that's exactly.
I love that title.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. You aren't alone, and you need to, the analogy I use is that you need to step out of the closet and extend your hand and ask for help. Yes. And if you don't, if you let it all bubble and boil inside of you, all that's going to do is it's not going to do your mental health, your mental well-being any great favors. It's going to, in fact, you're going to start to, if you aren't depressed, you're going to become depressed, and you'll get more and more as time goes on. And life's too short for that.
It really is. Yeah. I'm processing. That's really great advice. Yeah. Not that we're giving advice, but
No, of course not.
That's why people tune into the show, though, is to hear what we would recommend, to see if it will suit their life, suit what they need as well. So perfect segue again, talking about the book. Where will people be able to get the book when it comes out in January?
So it right now it is available for pre-order on Amazon. So people can go up to the 17th of January. You can pre-order your copy of You Are Not Alone. It will be available it officially launches on the 17th of January, and it'll be available. It's on the Amazon site. It's on, I think, Barnes and Noble and a number of other sites as well.
Perfect.
And so, yeah, so it'll be, I'm really looking forward to the book hitting the street, and just because there's some real good messages in there, you know, and we've talked about a lot of them, but there's some really good messages for people that are kind of, geez, I don't know what I should do, or why do I feel the way I do, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think I interviewed 5 different individuals, and their stories are in the book. So
nice.
It's and they've got some pretty compelling stories. So it'll be, it's a good read.
Excellent. Oh, I'm sure it is. And so, of course, where can people follow you?
So for me, 3 places. The first is on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. I think it's at Doug Talent C, I think, something like that. But never mind, we won't go there. I'm on LinkedIn. So if you just search on my name, you'll find me. And what did I say? LinkedIn, and then Facebook. And then as a final thing is that if you want to send me a direct message, you can do so at doug.lawrence@talentc.ca. That's my email address, and I'd be absolutely honored to respond back and, you know, answer any questions, do whatever I can to help make your life that much better.
Wonderful. And of course, all of those links will be down in the description below, because we want to make sure people can very easily get a hold of you. So again, Doug, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing. This was another awesome episode. Yeah.
Thank you.
So again, hit that link up down below, order your pre-copy now, because I guarantee this book is going to be awesome. We do have a merch store. 10% of those proceeds goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. Oh, and if you didn't know, Doug is actually one of my Canadian guests. So love it. I love it when I have another Canadian on the show, because we don't get many of them. We do have Patreon if you want to support the channel in that way. Hit that like and subscribe button. Share these episodes out. It is the best way to help get our message across. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye.